Good morning and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is suffering and compassion. We often mistake our suffering for caring. And so we're going to have a look today at the relationship of suffering with caring. Good morning, Rosalind. So good to have you here with us this morning. Welcome, and welcome to everybody else who's joining us. Before we get started on today's topic, let's just take a minute or two to get present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, all your molecules, all your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together and vigorously rub them against each other to feel the friction, the temperature, the pressure. And then when you stop rubbing them together, feel the buzzing. Allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables you to experience life. So welcome. Today is compassion and suffering. So we know the saying, misery loves company, right? The thing about the misery story is that while misery may love company, when we dive down into the pit of despair that another feels, we often end up incapacitating ourselves and making ourselves incapable of being able to really be a solid support for those people. And we think that, falling into that pit of despair, taking on their pain, somehow alleviates that pain for them, when in fact, what it's doing is amplifying the field of pain or the pain body, right? And I'm not saying that we should be skipping and jumping when someone is in deep despair. I'm saying that compassion doesn't mean that we need to experience that deep suffering. We can be present to someone and their experience without taking it on as our own. Good morning, Lisa. Welcome. We're talking about suffering and compassion, or compassion and suffering, and how they're not synonymous, that we can have a deep compassion for someone else's experience and still remain in our center and not take on and carry that pain. We can most likely, if we are not deeply immersed and overcome by the pain of another, then we are in a better position to be able to be truly present for them, to be able to support them in a way that is truly life affirming. And we talk about, I feel your pain. And the truth is, when we're, I believe that there are some people that actually do feel the pain of another, but for the most part, the pain that we feel is our projected pain. You know, when we feel pain for someone else's situation, we're projecting. We're projecting our interpretation. We're fabricating a simulation in our own mind and experience that might have us in a similar position. And so Lisa says, I'm an empath and I had to learn to ground, center, and protect. Before I did, I carried everyone's energy. And Lisa, I can relate. I'm very empathic myself and took on all kinds of energies from all kinds of people for many, many years without having any awareness that I was doing that. And so I was this energy sponge, and I imagine that you have dealt with that as well. Many of us who are in this community here are very empathic and are therefore have been, if not currently, you know, if we've learned to manage ourselves and our energies and our fields more consciously, we hopefully are less susceptible to the tides of the emotions of others. And the thing is that we you know, the way that we would care as empathic individuals would be to kind of merge into the other, or allow their energy to merge into us in a way, because that's how we would experience the world, is through this feeling sense, this felt sense. And I'm not saying to shut off those emotions. I am saying to be recognizing that we don't have to absorb everything around us. You know, that we can be present to someone and still present in ourselves and present to our own wholeness and our own center. And then when we are in that place of center, it gives us a greater capacity to actually be compassionate and present with another. And so Lisa says, what's weird is my daughter's lacking the empathy gene. She found this out when she did 23andMe, and it shows she has 0 empathy. So Lisa, I never heard anything ever about an empathy gene. This is a very interesting concept to me. Good morning, Dido. Welcome. So good to have you here with us this morning. We're talking about suffering and compassion, and how we often go with the assumption, or culturally almost looks like, that the way that we express compassion is by sharing in someone's suffering. And it's a misconception to imagine that that my suffering with you alleviates your suffering. It's not true. It just expands that pain body and that field of pain. So I'm fascinated by this idea of an empathy gene. Yeah, that's really very interesting to me. And yeah, I'm just fascinated by that. And Lisa says, I never heard of it before either, but there it was in her panel. It really explained a lot about her. Yeah, I wonder, you know, I know people in my life that I believe have a challenge with empathy, with being able to recognize the emotions of another. And it's very interesting, because being empathic it's, I can't even imagine, it's so foundational to my being that I can't even imagine really what it is to not be able to have an awareness of another's feelings, to have some sense of their experience, some sensitivity to their experience. Very, very interesting. And to recognize that it explains a lot about her. We have, this goes into the notion of worldviews, right? We tend, and I don't know if you do, I'm going to say I have tended in my life to assume, what they say about assume, but to assume that there was a thread of commonality, that there was some level of shared experience of the world that would allow for connection and deeper communication. And over my life, I've had many painful occasions to recognize that we don't necessarily share worldviews with other people or with everyone. And we don't necessarily share sensibilities with others. And I think that there are some gaps that I truly don't know how to bridge. I mean, I talked to you several weeks, I don't have a sense of time, but a while ago about a conversation with someone who really had no sense of purpose or meaning or any need for it. And, maybe this makes me naive, but I can't even imagine. I truly cannot imagine, like, 'cause from the time I was a kid, I was seeking purpose and meaning. So, it's so foundational to my sense of being that I can't fathom what it is to be in a context, in a life without that inquiry, even without that impulse, that drive toward meaning or purpose. And this person also said that they couldn't imagine my vantage point. It was mind-blowing, really, truly mind-blowing. So, to recognize that someone doesn't, I'm skeptical of a gene that relates to empathy. I truly am. But, whether it's truth or metaphor, I do know people who are not empathetic. And, we hear of sociopaths too, who just have no ability to connect emotionally with others. So Lisa says, I've got to go. We're going to the beach. Yay, Lisa, enjoy the beach. Congratulations. Wonderful for you. Enjoy, enjoy. That's amazing. So, yeah, suffering and compassion. There's a difference between weeping with someone and offering a shoulder for someone to cry on, I think. And it may be that there are times when someone needs you to be meeting them where they are emotionally. And I think we can do that without losing ourselves in that space, particularly spaces of grief and despair. I believe I've shared with you guys that I spent a lot of years with suicidal ideation, and there was a point where I was very, very present to the choice of whether to commit suicide or not. And I was deeply in despair and depression. And I remember there was one person that I had thought was a friend at the time who told me I should just stop it, just stop it. Stop being depressed. And for any of you who have ever wrestled with depression, you can understand how absolutely, like almost obscenely disconnected and absurd that kind of admonition is, to say, well, just stop it. Like, if I knew how to stop it, you think I would feel this way? Not so much, right? And then there was another person that was able to meet me where I was able to just be fully present to my deepest darkness, to my deepest despair. They were able to be there unflinchingly. They weren't despairing, but they were able to just give me space to be where I was. And I can say that that was profoundly compassionate. It was, they weren't diving into my despair with me, but they were allowing me the space. It was so powerful for me. It was the most powerful interaction that I remember during that very bleak, very, very dark time of my life. It was the most powerful, the most transformative experience. This person wasn't trying to change me. They weren't trying to make me feel something different. They weren't trying to make me see something different. They were just there and present for the experience I was going through. And I think that so many of the folks in this community are healer people, teacher people, transformation people. And I think it's so important to know that we're not helping. So many of us are helper people, right? We're not helping someone by diving down into the pit with them. Maybe reaching a hand to them. That's a whole different story, being present with them, but not taking on the energy of that despair. So I know so many people who it's almost like they make someone else's tragedy their own. And then it's about them. Like, I'm suffering so much because so-and-so is going through so much. Like, somehow my suffering for them is going to help them. I don't mean to be dissociated. That's not what I'm advocating here, but I'm just saying, and I've seen people who elevate their self-importance through suffering in the name of others. And it becomes a story about them rather than a compassion for another. I'm sure you've known people that do this. And it's as if there is we get brownie points for suffering. You know, that there's something meritorious somehow to the degree to which we can suffer. And this is something that I think is part of our culture to a great degree, you know, just grin and bear it, you know, suck it up, you know, suffer in silence, but suffer. I don't, you know, like I'm wondering how this is landing for you guys. Are you, does this resonate, or is this just my perspective that I noticed that, that we tend to glorify suffering and, the notion that misery loves company, I think gets to get rewritten to misery loves compassion, you know, or misery calls for compassion and clarity and presence. And I know as healer people, one of the things that often happens is that we do literally take on the energy of another. And in the healing process, you know, there's an energy transfer, and sometimes that person gets better and the healer takes on whatever it was, you know, it's like I'll process it through me. And that it's not necessary. That's not how the healing has to work. That happens when we believe that we're the healer rather than the vehicle for the energy that is the healing. And that's a huge distinction. You know, it's kind of another version of the merit to suffering. Like, let me take your suffering from you and I will bear it. It's like, no. That's not an elevated place to come from. It's not the way it needs to be. You know, as we allow ourselves to be a channel for energy, for life, then we don't have to take on all this stuff. It's not about us. It's about being a clear vehicle for the energy of life. So Rosalind says, how to discern validating versus surrendering. So interesting. Validating another's experience, recognizing, being present to it, versus surrendering. And I'm curious about your use of the word surrendering. You know, what because there's so many different ways to interpret the word. You know, surrender can be giving up, giving in. Surrendering can be letting go. So I'm not quite sure what the implication is from what you're speaking there, Rosalind, but to be able, you know what, it just keeps coming down to presence. We talk about that all the time, like presence is where it's at. The more present we're able to be, the more the energy of life flows through us clearly and cleanly, the more appropriate our actions and interactions become. Yeah. So I guess ultimately that we're called to find our center, to be moving from that space of center to, because what happens when we get into misery or suffering that's from another, or when we're receiving energies from another with or without our knowledge, what's happening is that we're losing our sense of core and centeredness and our presence. We're not being the clear channel for life energy that we have the capacity to be. And maybe that's an idealized state. I mean, we're not static beings. We're constantly in a state of fluctuation and dynamic motion, emotionally and intellectually and physically, and we're in a constant and dynamic interplay of influences. And Rosalind says, so maybe not reasoning why it's happening, but more acceptance of the undesirable emotions. Okay, I love that, because you're talking about undesirable emotions, and we tend to judge the way we feel. And then when we judge the way we feel, we tend to censor the way we feel, and we tend to try and protect ourselves from the feelings, defend ourselves, or sequester those feelings. And as a result, we make them perpetuate, and then they can be following us through our entire lives. So I think when we are able to be present to the emotions, accept the emotions, we don't then need to perpetuate them. And that's an art. That's a balancing act, because when we accept the feelings, sometimes we want to hold on to those feelings. It's like, I'm feeling sad, or I am depressed, rather than I'm feeling this way. This is where the feeling is in my body. This is what it feels like. We start making stories to justify the feelings, and then they perpetuate, and then it expands and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, rather than feeling the feelings when we feel them and allowing them to move and change, as they will do when we are allowing ourselves to be present. Anyway, fun conversation as always. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Compassion and suffering. Let's make the distinction. And I think that's it for this morning. So I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection. And I go live here each weekday morning on the Enlightened World Network YouTube channel and Facebook page at 9 a.m. Eastern. And I invite you to check out all the other amazing programming on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel, Enlightened World Living and EWN One with the Earth. And until next time, so much gratitude and appreciation and love to you. I hope to see you again here really, really soon.